HMIS system in your continuum. So you're one of the individuals sitting here today that this training doesn't actually apply to. You will not be required to use this HMIS system. You'll be required to use the one you're already using.
But how are you going to extract that information?
We're not.
Oh, you're not?
The county contact is going to have to report to Amanda from that HMIS system, just like the county contact from our HMIS are going to have to report to Amanda.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
I tried to make it as easy as I could, and I really don't understand HMIS like they do. I just know the past stuff. I know what we need, what the feds want, and they give us what we want. So if you guys have systems, we'll just pull your reports from your individual system. We're not going to have you, try to make two systems talk, because that's the issue we ran into before. Fixes is not going to be able to talk to Bowman, and it's not going to be able to talk to DCD, correct?
Well, there are different protocols that could allow it, but if you have a system eventually that is required to talk to many different types of systems, it gets expensive.
And we don't have.
That's an issue we're going to have to address down the road. It's not for them to.
Okay.
Huh?
The short-term expense saves money over the long term, and that's the way we're looking at it.
Right.
And that's what.
That's a community thing, though, not a state mandate thing.
We won't be doing it because we're broke.
Although we are working on ways in the future to implement with various other systems. So that's neither here nor there.
I'll get your coffee when it comes.
You give me coffee?
When it comes.
Oh man, I'm on a mission when it comes to coffee.
Hey, what do you like in you?
Just fill it up. I'm already good.
Oh, I'll get it clean when it comes.
Okay, so I accidentally cut Brian off when we were training earlier. I saw various people eyes glazing over. It was time for a break. So he's going to real quickly touch on the last piece of some of the contact tracker, and then we're going to move into the data sharing.
And real quick, I mean, should be a fairly simple process of entering contacts into the system by clicking the button and entering them in. Just want to quickly show, if you're curious to say, hey, what contacts does this client have? You basically click this history link, and it'll basically pop up a new window, and basically shows all the contacts that have been collected for this client. So if you make a mistake and go, oh, I put in the wrong date or the wrong method of contact, you can easily go in here and just switch it, resave, or you can delete it if you go, oh, I should have been on a different client. That's all I really wanted to show on the contacts, of where they are, where you can see them, edit them. And also if it has things like contact status, you can show which one's the first one, and then you'll have all the follow-up ones as well. And we'll kind of talk about during the program status, when we do the enrollment, that when a client isn't enrolled into a program, you're basically entering in all the contacts pre-enrollment. We kind of call those, I guess, free-floating contacts, where there is no program status. So these are no program. So that means they're just attached to the client. You're collecting information. Possibly is going to be in the program, possibly not. Now, once the client is deemed eligible, accept services, and you enroll them in the client, all the contacts that you have collected during that period will actually get attached to that program enrollment that you do, and this will actually change from no program to whatever your past program is called in the system. That's just a way you can review and check up on where your contact data came from and how you enter it and everything like that.
Go back to that client profile for a minute.
The client profile, yeah. We're also getting questions over the break. Well, I wanted to clarify something. We're on the client profile screen right here. This is where you collect general information about the client themselves: the first name, last name, social, date of birth, address, whatnot. It is not this particular page that we're on here. This is a page that you can build over time. As you get more information, you keep adding to it. This is a separate piece from the contact piece right here. The contact tracks information about the contact itself, which then is kind of in addition to the client profile, but you're not actually collecting client information in the contact. You're building a client profile over time. I just wanted to make the distinction that these are the contact tracker here. This is a point in time. You have a phone call, you have a meeting, whatever. This is a point in time snapshot of the type of contact you had itself, whereas the client profile information will be built over time here.
Oh, I had a question. We had a question.
Hello? Okay. Over the break about, will you need to sign that privacy for just entering a contact for somebody that's not enrolled?
No, we're getting to that right after this, but again, to enter the data in the system is implied consent. You do not need, but by the client accepting the services, they're accepting the data collection. The signature that's required from the client is a release of information, whether or not you are allowed to share that information with other agencies. And that, yes, you cannot share that without that signature.
Right, but you can enter a contact, whether it's
Yes.
outreach or whatever, without having
Yep.
that.
And that'll just be your record, but it won't be shared with anyone.
Okay.
Dominic.
I can't hear you.
We would just need to know all the different other agencies within our continuum that's using this system so we can have them on a consent form. Do we not need to list those agencies?
Again, this is for PA HMIS. Montgomery, you said you're with Montgomery? Delaware, I'm sorry. You use what, Bowman system, correct? Costello? Okay, well, however their consent forms are set up the consent forms, the release of information are federally required. So every HMIS system will have those, but how they're implemented into your system varies differently. Yep.
Yep. All right, no sharing. I don't know how much we're into the sharing stuff.
Is this me again?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not paying attention here. All right, so, yeah, we covered that. We covered the next slide.
This is Amanda's question.
This is essentially the question you just asked, Amanda, about essentially we have to protect the client data, and we need a signature from the client to be able to share that data. You can create, obviously, like we just said, you can create a client profile without sharing any data, and that doesn't require a signature, but to share it, which is what he's going to be covering here, how to do that. To share it, the client has to have a signature page. We can get in a lot of trouble if a user were to allow data sharing without having a consent form signed. This is more of it's a mixture of a policy with law mixed with how to do it in the system. And just green, thank you. All right, so on this slide, essentially, the way the consent form works is every adult client has to sign a consent form before you can share their data. If an adult client also has dependents, the adult client is permitted on behalf of those dependents to sign a consent form. So you could have 3 or 4 people on one consent form. However, an adult cannot sign a consent form for another adult. So essentially the way this works is when the client presents for services, and this might not be really applicable in an outreach situation, but once they're coming into your program and you've been working with them, in order to enroll them in the PATH program, you will have to set up a data sharing policy, whether that be the client signed the form and says, I don't want my data shared, or whether they allow it to be shared. But the system will not allow you to enroll them until this form is collected. So to create a client profile, you don't need the form, but to do anything with the client profile, the system will enforce the form collection.
Yeah, I can kind of take it from here. This is kind of a copy of the client consent form, kind of the second page where you actually do the sharing themselves. And we're actually I'm going to show you that through the system themselves. Because what you basically do is you talk to the client about the sharing options. There's 3 basic options. You've got full sharing, custom sharing, as well as no sharing. So there's three basic options, but the system is very flexible, especially with that custom option, to basically pick and choose which data you want to keep inside your agency, keep it private, and which agency you want to broadcast or kind of share throughout the system. So almost every single data element in the system has that ability to turn on and off that sharing, depending on the client's wishes, you know, the caseworker's wishes, the agency, how they operate. So we are going to go back into the system, kind of show you where that is. We're going to go back to Benjamin Smith. So as you see, it's kind of a process. You know, you put the client into the system, you collect contacts. Once they're ready to accept services or deemed eligible, we have a data sharing tab that you'll need to visit. We're going to go ahead and go in here. And that's actually a good spot for the DV stuff as well. Forgot about that. This is the data sharing page where basically you set different sharing options, as you can see here, full, custom sharing. Here's the client consent forms are on our website, as well as directly within the system, and we'll cover that in a second. But the victims of domestic violence, the system actually allows you to collect client data for those clients that are fleeing a domestic violence situation. But before you can enact any kind of sharing in the system, we need to know that client's status. Are they fleeing domestic violence or are they not? So you need to answer this question, this assessment here, and it's basically a yes, no, don't know, refused based on working with the client, what their situation is. Anything except for a no. So if they're not fleeing domestic violence, you can answer no. If you answer yes, don't know, or refused, since it's not a 100% no, they are not a victim of domestic violence, the system will treat them as what we call as a DV client and will enact certain security and privacy measures within the system to ensure that their data not only stays within the agency, but can only be viewed by authorized users within that agency. So even though, say you're going to enroll a client into the program, a data sharing policy is still required for what we call DV victims, DV clients, but if they're identified that way, no data, even if you select full data sharing, which you probably won't, but if it accidentally happens, that data sharing is completely cut off, that kind of policy, so none of their data accidentally gets shared outside the agency. Now, when we say authorized users, usually all clients in an agency can be viewed by all users in that agency. But if they are a DV client, only those users that specifically have them on their caseload. So that client has to be specifically assigned to you as a user for you to be able to view them through like client searches and actually locate and see their data and change their data. The other authorized users we have is an agency manager override. If you are the designated agency manager at your agency in the system, you can also are an authorized user so that you can see these DV clients as well. So basically, a lot of the assessments, it's kind of an assessment in the system. You basically answer the question, and then all assessments, and we'll get to that during the program section. You basically enter the date when you collect that information. And then once you hit save, we're going to say this client is not a DV client. Then it allows you to go ahead and create a data sharing policy in the system. Now, these are the data sharing forms, and you can actually, there are links where you can actually click it, and they'll actually come up in PDF form, or you can have some printed out.
And we're sorry, the system is definitely not this slow. We're on limited bandwidth here in the conference room.
The first page basically kind of, and this is something that you definitely want to read over, understand, because you're going to be explaining this to your clients. Basically, the first page kind of explains privacy, security, the sharing information. Now, the second page is basically the page that has where the information, what sharing settings the client and the caseworker agree to. The first setting is I agree to allow full sharing basically throughout the system. The second one is something we call custom sharing, saying, you know, the client and the caseworker decide I want to share some data, but I want to pick which data elements, not all of it. And then the last one is basically no data. I want to keep all my information inside the agency. And basically it requires that the client sign and date it, as well as you need to fill out the agency, because each client needs a form per agency. This isn't something where it's every enrollment. It is just a one client per agency kind of form, and also needs to be signed by agency personnel. We also have a supplemental form in case you do custom sharing, and we'll kind of go into that once we get there. So you need to, depending on what the client selected, this is kind of an area where you record what the client and the caseworker entered on those forms. We've kind of got it set up exactly the same so you can mirror the data sharing. So if you select full, that basically means all data, and as you can see here, these are every single data element in the system that can be shared or not shared through the system. So full, of course, checks all of them. If it's checked, that means it's shared. If it's unchecked, that means it's not shared. So full has everything checked. Now, if you also have none, which is no data sharing, it locks everything down, meaning every single data element is not going to be shared throughout the system. Now, the custom one is the one where it shares everything by default, but this is where you'll go through and you'll be able to uncheck certain data elements that you don't want to send outside the system. So in this case, say this person does not want to share their Social Security number, and these are kind of like an all box for the group where you can check or uncheck. Say they don't want to share their health information, and maybe they don't want to share their address. So as you can see, you can kind of go through and uncheck what information is shared and not shared through the system. Now, if you do custom sharing, we have this supplemental form that you'll want to use, and that's only necessary if you're actually choosing custom sharing, that basically mirrors the selections in the system. So you can go through and say, oh, I want to share this or that, so that you basically mirror what they entered in the system. And you want to keep these client consent forms in paper form on file with your client's paper file records. Once you figured out what you want to share, basically you hit save down at the bottom, and the system will basically enact the sharing into the system. Now, as you can see here, we kind of have two sides to the data. This left-hand side, as you can see, is all familiar stuff on the client profile. So there's like the name, Social Security number, the contact information, physical information, as well as all those additional maiden name, veteran status. These are what we kind of call profile elements, and they're located on the profile. Any data that is shared on this side, profile, is what actually gets broadcast through the system in those global client profiles. So those blue records, when you do a search, when you open it up, that's basically data that's been shared by a client at another agency. It could be one agency, it could be 10 agencies that the guy's visited. So that's kind of where that information comes from, and that's where you control that. Now, on the right-hand side is what we call the assessment data, and we'll kind of get into that where you collect like health assessments, employment, education services. That's kind of where you collect it in the program, and this data is either shared or not through what we call a global data sheet, where you can view information like where a person's visited another agency, you know, what programs or assessments have been done there. That's basically how you set up the data sheet, the data sharing. Like I said, oh, I'm sorry.
Before Brian, sometimes he gets in a role, he gets focused.
Well, I'm focused, so yeah, shout it out.
I'm shirking my duties here, paying attention. Go ahead.
So it's one consent per person.
Correct.
So even if they go to a different county, they can see in there that they've already signed that consent?
The data consent forms are what each client has signed per agency. So if they went to an agency in a different county, they would have a different consent form.
Okay, because a lot of our housing programs are out of different counties, but they cover our county. So like our Shelter Plus would require the HMIS form. But then if we're enrolling them through PASS in L County, then Clearfield County would also have to, we'd have to do two.
Well,
one to go with that application and one to do.
If you're kind of a joinder, that's a little.
Well, they're not in our joinder. They're under our PASS county.
Well, it all depends how you're set up in the system. So if, like, you're set up in the system as one organization or agency, then you're just going to have one client in your agency. Now, your programs can all be under your organization, and they can have, you know, a shelter program in this county, shelter plus care in that county, but they're still under your organization, which could span multiple counties. So it's all about who's in your agency.
And this is part of the structure, and this is why we needed that information on those forms to know how to set it up. The structure of the system is, if you think of it like a tree or I don't know, a pyramid, the agency is kind of the top level, and underneath that agency you could have multiple locations, but they're still part of the same organizational structure. So I guess when we say agency, it's one form per organizational structure.
Well, what I'm talking about is we're a joiner of Cameron and L County.
Mm-hmm.
Our past counties cover 4 others, Jefferson, Clearfield, McKean, and Potter, which are not covered under our joinder.
Then Cameron and L, set up as one, would have one form, and the other counties would have their own forms.
Even though we serve the 6 past counties under that 2-county
Well,
joinder.
if you were the service provider, again,
We are the county and service provider.
if you're the service provider, each service provider fills out one form. It doesn't matter how many counties you cover.
Yeah.
Like HMIS is not. You guys are very used to a county-specific system. HMIS is very regional. It doesn't matter if you are in 6 counties at the same time. If you are one organization that spans 6 counties, you're treated as one organization with 6 locations.
So they would just need one
You would need one form,
because
yes.
some of the people they serve may be in Potter County, may be in McKean County, although they're
That's fine.
Cameron.
Yep. Yes.
My question is regarding the homeless youth. Can they sign their own form, consent form?
Ooh, that's a good one. Children who are considered unaccompanied, meaning that they are presenting by themselves, yes, they are permitted to sign their own form.
For situations where the county agency is separate from the tax provider, will this form need to be completed for the county?
It's completed by people who are directly serving clients. So
Will our tax provider need to complete one of these forms to share information with the county? Like, will we need one of these forms completed and signed off for that individual to share information with the tax county?
if you're part of the Path County, if you're like a grant administrator, so to speak, no. You will still have access to this information because you're an administrator of that information.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be...
It's to share between provider to provider. Anything else?
I saw on your assessment of what HIV/AIDS. So that information is confidential, so that cannot be shared, right?
That information is actually not confidential. If it bothers you or if the client doesn't want it shared, you can turn off the data sharing. However, that's a HUD-mandated data element. HUD also administers HOPLA. That data element is a simple yes or no answer, and it's meant to be there to protect the caseworker. However, if you don't want to share it, simply turn it off. And you'll be able to turn off, you can turn off the entire panel of health information if you don't want that information shared.
Or just that one. And just a couple quick other notes about the data sharing. Throughout the client profile and also some of the assessments when we get there, we have all these visual icons throughout the system. I know they're probably kind of hard to see, but it's basically a little lock. When it's an open lock, that basically means, hey, you're sharing this data globally. As you can see over here, remember I turned off address. It'll be a closed lock, and it's basically kind of shows you visually throughout the system what data is being shared and what data is not being shared. Now, kind of on another note, I kind of created this Benjamin Smith specifically because I actually have him in the system in another agency. So this person, whenever anybody has a global ID, they're kind of linked up with another person in another agency. You may see these little globes here. Now that basically means, hey, there's another client in another agency that shared data, and the system's letting you know, hey, I've got some either more recent data or some new data that you don't have. So here he's got primary phone, height, and ethnicity. So all you have to do is run your cursor over it, and it'll basically give you the data, hey, this is the extra data the system has, globally on the top level from combining these agency clients. If you want to use it, you click on it, and it basically populates, says, hey, here's the new phone number, and you can hit save, and now it's part of your profile. And the same thing, say you enter an email address and save it and it's shared, you basically are sending it up, and another agency can look at it and go, oh, here's a new email address. So you're basically, as you're sharing data, you're kind of a big community basically sharing data back and forth to try to get the most information kind of collaboratively for profiles. And it also works with assessments as well. We'll kind of get to that in the program section.
And again, you guys have control over what data is and is not shared. This is not a system default. Everything is shared. I just want to make that very clear.
Switch mics for me. That's bad dying over there.
Okay.
We were going to take a break, but we're going to go straight into the program stuff. Do you want to talk about the quick introduction?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, we kind of talked about the client, the client side, all in the client information, which is basically the profile, the data sharing, as well as the contents themselves. Once the client has been deemed eligible and has accepted services, this is where you're actually going to do the actual enrollment into the program. And we kind of have a whole program side of the system that we're going to kind of talk about now. The program record holds information about that client's individual program stay, which includes their enrollment information, exit information, such as the dates that they were in the program, their residence prior, their destination where they're leaving, as well as individual services and referrals that you provided to them during their program stay. As I said, the program is only there for once they're actually going to receive services from PATH program, an example here. Each user does have specific permissions to which program. While everybody can kind of view off the same client's profile in the agency, except for those DV clients which has those specific privacy. From the program side, each user, we have a second set of permissions that basically allows specific caseworkers to work on specific programs, so that a caseworker working on an SSO or a shelter doesn't mess with someone working with PATH data. So it keeps it very kind of compartmentalized.
So real quickly, the point here is that every user in an agency can share the client record. However, each user is given special permissions to interact with the program, and they are the only ones who can interact with the combination of the client and the program at the same time. So that's another way we keep data separate.
Now here's quickly we kind of like throwing out the data elements here, kind of the main HUD program data elements, as well as what we call the enrollment assessments, information that's collected during the enrollment, just a list for everybody to have. Now we're going to go back into the system and kind of do a demo where we're going to actually walk you through the enrollment process. Once you start an enrollment, it kind of walks you through what data you need to be collected within the system itself. So we're going to start with our Benjamin Smith. And you basically enter them. As you see here, we basically have client information, which has the profile and the data sharing. Over here on the other side, we have programs and services. This is where all the program data is entered into the system. So after you're done here, you basically click the program and services area, and this is a whole kind of other side of the system for all the program data. Now here basically, Since there's only one client per agency, basically you can enroll clients into multiple programs in that agency, depending on each caseworker's permission. So as you can see here, this guy has no program history, so he hasn't been enrolled into any programs. And once we do an enrollment, I'll kind of show the records, how they're showed up on the screen so that you can enter them and keep the different program records stay separate. Now here's the enrollment tool that basically kind of is a drop-down of all the programs you can administer. So of course this is the PATH program. You basically pick the program you want to enroll them into, and depending on how your program is administered, it could be a single service site, or in this case, this PATH program is actually administered in 2 different locations. So you need to make sure you select the right location. We're going to say this person is going to be enrolled into the PATH program at the Harrisburg location. So once you pick that, basically you hit enroll. That's pretty much as simple as it is for what program you're going to do. And it's basically going to take you on a little journey. Now, if a client, like we kind of talked about, there are some validation when you go into the enrollment. The client needs to have a data sharing policy. If he doesn't, the system will flash a warning and stop you at that point. Also, with the PATH program, they must have at least one contact, and of course, the last contact must have that eligible and accepted services as the eligibility. If it doesn't meet those 3, it'll actually stop you and it'll flash a little message telling you what the problem is. But since we've met that, it'll basically let you through this process. The first thing we get to is a data element validation screen that basically collects information, what we call the universal information, that are very HUD and PATH specific. If you've collected most of that information on the profile, which is basically the date of birth, social security number, ethnicity, race, gender, veteran status, kind of the big demographic ones, you won't see them on the screen, because this is kind of a place that it double checks to see you have all that information. Any of it that you don't have, it will actually show here, because we didn't want to stop the process, make you go back to the profile, fill it out, and then come back in here. So it's kind of a little shortcut, and you'll probably only see most of the data elements on here during your first enrollment, if ever, depending on how complete the profile is at the time. So you basically fill out that information, as well as veteran status. Now, a note about veteran status, you're always going to be stopped for veteran status, because the basic rule is veteran status needs to be reconfirmed for every enrollment. So don't be surprised if you say, hey, I've already done veteran status. It's just basically saying, hey, is it still no, is it still yes? It'll pull in the information. If it's different, you can change it, and it'll write it back to the profile. If it's the same, all you have to do is hit save, and it'll move on to the next step. Now,
that's a federal requirement, so that's one we couldn't get around.
Yeah. Now what we're going to do is go into the assessment loop. Now, assessments in the system are basically groups of data elements that kind of describe kind of the client situation in a number of different areas, such as health, education, employment, income, and benefits. Those are kind of the 5 big assessment areas. Depending on the program type, each assessment is required or not required based on specific federal rules. For PATH programs, the only ones that are required during enrollment are the health and what we call the disabling condition data element. So as you can see here, we're stopped on the health, and it has to be entered for every single client. And it's made up of physical developmental disability, chronic health condition, HIV/AIDS, the mental health problem, and substance abuse. And you basically pick from the drop-downs yes, no, and client doesn't know, so you basically need to answer every single one on the screen. Now, of course, if they're in the program, they probably have a mental health. When you select yes, they usually ask a couple secondary questions. Now, the secondary questions are usually, is it expected to be of a long duration and substantially impair their ability to live independently, as well as the other secondary question is usually, have they received any treatment before they've entered the program? So we also kind of ask these questions. We kind of take a snapshot of these assessments when they enter, and we also have the ability to kind of take these assessments through their program stay. So as you answer the questions, you can kind of see how their data evolves over time. It kind of gives you a good comparison of their state of being before they entered and their state of being during or after. So this is really good data that's used to kind of simulate success per client in the program. Then we've got substance abuse, which can be answered basically no or the affirmatives. Instead of a yes, it actually asks for a specific substance abuse problem. We're just going to select no there. General health. And then each assessment basically needs to enter in an assessment date. Now, the assessment date isn't the date that you enter it into the system. I'm going to just use the calendar. There we go. Now, that date is the date that you actually collect the data from the client, not when you enter it into the system. So there can be sometimes lags of a couple days. We try to, at least, from a data timeliness standpoint, you want to try to get data in within 3-4 days, a week at the most, when you enter that information. Now, down at the bottom, we've got these navigations, and you basically should stay on these navigations, and we've kind of developed a system where it kind of walks you through the process and takes you through all the screens of the assessments. So as you can see here, you've got save and next assessment. So what it does is it saves the information and also will take you to the next assessment. Now, with health questions, we also kind of tie it to disabling conditions. Now, disabling condition is kind of a HUD-based term, and we've got this little health thing that kind of kind of shows you what the official rule is. And
actually based on 3 different federal regulations that HUD combined for us.
Use your mic, because they don't.
It's actually based on 3 different federal regulations that have been combined into one definition. So essentially what the system does is that if any of the questions you've answered fall, or I guess meet the criteria, the system will automatically define it as yes. If it doesn't have enough information, it will prompt you.
And as you can see here, if it does, as you can see here, the system identified that, hey, we have enough information to identify the person as having a disabling condition. It will be hard-coded as yes. You can't answer it. You can't change the answer. And it'll actually tell you which of the conditions met the validation that the person can be considered with a disabling condition. So you basically hit OK there. And then what the system does is it kind of, as you can see here, it'll take you along a journey. Now, when you get to ones that are required, you basically are stopped. And those are the ones that have red at the top with the asterisk. That means you can't get by it until you answer it per the rules of the program. Now, the other 4 assessments, which are education, employment, income, and benefits, those are just in black, and basically the navigation is open, meaning it's not a required assessment to basically complete this enrollment. Now, if you have the information, if you do collect it, we do recommend you enter it, and you can basically enter the information depending on what you collect from the client, and you can hit save and next assessment. Now, say we come to employment, we don't know that information. This next assessment button basically is a way of saying, it's kind of a skip button, saying, hey, I don't have employment, I'm going to skip it. Oh, I don't have income, I'm going to skip it. And then when you get to the benefits screen, that's kind of the final screen in the initial enrollment. If you don't have that information, you can fill it out and save. If not, you just hit next assessment. As you can see, you always want to hit those next or save and next. It'll walk you basically through the system of what's required and what's not required for assessments. Now, the final screen we get to is what we call the final enrollment screen, which collects specific information about the enrollment. Everyone that is in the gold ball are the ones that are required, meaning if you hit save before you fill that out, the system will basically say, hey, all of these are required in the system. We've got the contact date, where Dan kind of talked about how HUD only has one field for contact. What we actually do is we pull in the contact date that you had on your first contact that's attached to the client when you entered in the system. So the system will automatically pull that in. Now, you have the engagement and what we call the enrollment entry date. Now, the engagement date is basically the date when you performed the engagement, when you actually sat down, did the assessment, collected the information for eligibility. And it can happen before the enrollment, after the enrollment. Basically, the only rule is that it can't be before the first contact, because you can't really do an engagement assessment before you've actually contacted with them. So that's kind of the date rule there. Now, the entry enrollment date is basically the program entry date. When is the first day that the client entered the program? And kind of the basic rule is, for a service-based program with PATH is, what is the first day that the client began a period of continuous services? So that's the date that you enter. We have referral source, but that is any application number, application date, and referral source are not required, but please feel free to use them for extra information. This person was actually referred from a street outreach, so we're going to put that in. Housing status at entry. This follows the same exact rules that we had on the contact, so I'm not going to go into a lot of information there. Basically, to be entered into the PATH program, they need to be either homeless or at risk of homelessness. So depending on their homeless situation, you either pick literally homeless for homeless or at risk eminently. So those are the two selections there. We don't have the other ones like stably housed because if they're that housing status, they wouldn't be eligible. Therefore, you wouldn't have gotten to this enrollment state. Residents prior to entry. This is basically their last prior entry before entering the system. It's kind of broken down into 3 sections: homeless situations, institutional settings, and other locations. You basically pick the one that best suits that fits their situation. Then there's days homeless, and this is basically a length of stay in their previous residence. So what it is a text field where you basically enter the number of days. So wherever they are placed, not meant for habitation, let's say they were there for 24 days, that's basically what you enter into the system. Now, if you don't know, sure.
This is just a note for those who have their own HMIS systems. You may need to work with your HMIS leads around this. HUD data standards for this the length of days homeless do not line up with PATH data standards. And so what we ended up doing here was collecting the actual number of days so that we could have the system figure out for both reporting requirements, which it was. So if your HMIS administrator, when it comes time to talk to them, has a question about this, you can tell them, yes, we know, it doesn't line up.
And we also had the zip code of last permanent address. So if you know the zip code, you basically enter in the 5-digit zip code. Now, for both of these, since they're text fields, if that information is either unknown or the client refuses or doesn't know that information, you can just check that box, and that will suffice the requirement of filling it out. So once you fill out all that information, you basically hit the Save button, and that actually finishes the enrollment process. And as you can see here, now there's a nice gray record there, which is basically your program record. Now the system kind of is very, as I said, each client can have multiple program stays, so you can do more enrollments, or you can actually go into the program record. Basically, you click on it, they'll turn green, you load it, and here is basically, here's all the enrollment information that you entered during the, if you made a mistake saying, oh, that should have been call response, or change some of the information there, that's where that information is to review and edit. There's also down in there, and we'll talk about this in the next section, is where the actual services and the referrals, where you actually attach those services you provided and referrals that you provided to the client within a specific program stay. Now we're going to quickly talk about a little bit about assessment management. Those assessments that you entered basically are attached to the program in the system. And what we actually have here are some assessment buttons. We have entry assessment and during enrollment assessment. The during enrollment assessment, each assessment, like I said, is kind of a point-in-time collection of their assessment data, different sets of data at point in time. So say you collected income information or health information 2 months into the program. What you can do is go ahead and click this during enrollment, and the system will basically ask you, hey, what data do you want to collect? And it'll specifically just prompt you for that information, so it'll collect it at that specific date during the program stay, basically between the entry and exit, and attach it to the client as you kind of get that progression of data. Now,
not required, but should you choose to collect it, it's available.
You got it. Now, with the entry, this button will only be here. Some of the entry are optional and some are required. If you've missed any optional ones, basically this gives you the opportunity to backfill it. So if you hit entry assessment, it basically, remember we skipped employment, income, and benefits. You can go back, fill this in, and it'll record it as the entry assessment. Now, once you've filled out all the entry information and all the assessments and entry are fulfilled, this button will actually disappear. Now we're going to quickly show you where do those assessments go. That's where this, within the client information, that's where this assessment tab actually comes in. If we click on that, all the assessments entered into this system from the program side are basically here within each assessment tab. As you see, here's all the tabs here. And here's basically each assessment. You got to make sure it's labeled. It'll show what program it's from, when the data was collected, because we collected health, and we also collected education, so that information's there. So you want to make sure when you're looking at that, just to review it, or say you made a mistake, you want to make sure you're doing the right one. Everything is in kind of read-only fashion, so you can kind of just view it. Now, if you want to update it, like you made a mistake, you hit the basic update button and say, oh, I meant to put, he was actually in 12th grade. And you can basically save it. It relocks itself. So that's kind of a nice, quick way to view the assessments. Now, assessments, you don't want to enter them into this area. All the program assessments, you want to make sure you go back into the program and services area and either enter them through the enrollment process, and we're also going to show the same during the exit process, or using these assessment buttons. That's the only way those specific assessments get attached to the program and get reported correctly. Okay, now we're going to go on to, I want to get out of there. Yes?
Can you speak up a little?
Does the system compile all this assessment data for that individual PATH program? Because some of the questions I saw on there are collected on our PATH annual report. So I was wondering if the system compiles that data.
There's a reason we asked for it.
Absolutely.
So yes, so we can report it, and the system, essentially, you can go through, continue to do your assessments. If you have additional assessments, you can update them. Everything on the back end, when we get to the reporting knows how to look at all that information and pull it with a quick little button.
Yeah, and that's why the health one are required, because we need some of that information to complete the PATH annual report.
So the annual report will actually be completed through the HMIS.
Right, and the provider won't even need to do it. The county person can have access to pull that report for you.
But until the feds say we don't have to use our current system, we're going to be reporting in both. You're doing it anyway, but the hope was that we would get the information out of HMIS so that it made it easier to report into our current.
We should stop here then.
Yes.
Any other questions?
I was reporting all my non-mentally ill homeless in a non-PATH category. And I was not reporting them on the monthly report either. So now I'm thinking I got to go back to do the whole year and do away with my non-HMIS category.
You shouldn't be reporting, at least for PATH purposes, other than outreach, because when you're doing outreach, you don't know whether a person is going to be eligible for PATH or not. So, yeah, you would have some people that would not fit the PATH criteria, meaning they wouldn't have the mental illness, or they weren't homeless, or they didn't do that homeless bit. But for our intents and purposes, you don't have to do this extra stuff for those folks that don't fit the PATH criteria.
I think the answer to your question is that HMIS is bigger than PATH. It's bigger than any one specific program. You can collect information about the clients. If you have another program that they would be eligible under, you simply enroll them in that program. You only use the PATH program to enroll them in if they're eligible for PATH-funded services. So you collect information about the client, but it may not get reported to PATH, it may get reported somewhere else, depending on how you enroll them.
So are you reporting it? Were you using it for PATH? Oh.
For AIR funding? What, HPRP?
Yeah, before. And now we don't have that funding. So
sidebar
But
about that later.
I do have HUD funds.
You wouldn't,
If you had a HUD-funded program, you would use that HUD-funded program to record that data.
right.
And then if you have PATH-funded program or services, you can have a client enrolled in multiple programs at the same time.
Yes, that's why we kind of have the clients and the programs where they could have multiple records depending on your different funding.
Right.
All right, if there's not any more questions, we are going to break for lunch. We had a little extra information about exit, but we'll hit that after lunch, and hopefully the remainder will go a little faster here.
Okay, so we'll get started with lunch. It should be close to 12 or so. And we'll come back. This is where I need you guys to let me know. Do you want this a half an hour, 45 minutes?